When you're walking down Bloor Street, and you make a detour around the person who happens to be talking to themselves, where are they? Because wherever they are, that's not the same place you are. If it was the same place, you wouldn't have any trouble walking right by them. Wherever they are, that's somewhere seriously different. Now, it turns out that we also have the capacity to represent that. And I would say an easy way to think about that is that there are two domains that are characteristic to experience. And one domain is the domain of the known. And the domain of the known is where when you act in a certain way, what you want to happen happens. Got it? And the reason that's the known is because if you act in a certain way and you get what you want, that means that you know what you're doing. It's actually the definition of knowing what you're doing. And that's a different definition than I know a fact about the objective world. So if you tell someone a joke or you tell a group of people a joke and they laugh and maybe they want another joke, it's like good for you. You know what you're doing. But if you tell them a joke and they sort of, look uneasy and glance at each other, well, it's time to rethink your sense of humor. And what you've just learned is that there's some mismatch between the manner in which you configure social reality and the social reality itself. Now, imagine what happens if you do tell a joke, or maybe a couple of jokes, and they flop badly. How do you feel when that happens? If you have any sense. How do you feel? Embarrassed, yes. So maybe you turn red, for example. What might happen if you feel embarrassed? What would you do?
Yeah, tell as many jokes.
Well, hopefully, right. It's like, that's right. You'd reevaluate your knowledge, and you might think, well, what the hell's wrong with me? Or you might think, what the hell's wrong with them? Which I would say is not a good starting point. Yeah, but seriously, though, because you got to watch that. Because if it's 10 people and you, maybe you're right. Maybe you are funny. But if all 10 of them think you're not, well, either you're not funny or you're telling your jokes to the wrong people, right? And sometimes it is the case that it's everyone else that's got the problem, but that's definitely not the first hypothesis that you might want to generate. Okay, so there's a place that exists that manifests itself when things that you don't want or expect happen. And I would consider that the unknown. And the unknown is a complicated place because it's a place where unexpected things happen. And that's also symbolically represented. And that's generally symbolically represented by feminine figures. Now, the reasons for that is extraordinarily complicated, and it's going to take a very long time to explain it. Partly it's because the masculine as a symbolic realm is already used up. That's the dominance hierarchy. And because we're basically social cognitive organisms, we're going to use representations that are basically human in order to start representing things that aren't precisely human. Because we have to start somewhere. We have to start with our basic primate cognitive system. And it's not like chimpanzees have culture. They have dominance hierarchies and troops. We have dominance hierarchies and troops and culture. And we have to represent that some way. And the way we represent it is by using the same systems that we were representing the simple structures with, but generalizing with them to encompass broader phenomena. So things that are permanent across time, things you know, or the fact that there are things that you know, things that you don't know, or the fact that there are things that you don't know. That's permanent. And then there's one other thing across time that's permanent. You. The fact that there's an I in the equation, right? So you think, well, what are people's experiential fields fundamentally composed of? Places you're secure in and that you understand. So that's your territory. And your territory is a very complex thing. It might even be an ideological territory. Your territory, things that you don't understand, that's not your territory. That's unexplored territory. And you don't know what the hell's going on there. And that's the unknown. And then the last common element is you. And so basic symbolic structures tend to represent those elements of reality. The known, the unknown, and the thing that mediates between them. And the thing that mediates between them is you, or more precisely, the thing that mediates between them is your individual consciousness. And that's like mediating between chaos and order. If you look up at the screen there, look at the Christian image on the left. That's called the open virgin. And there were quite a few statues of this sort that were created in medieval Europe in the 13th, 14th century. And I want to sort of tell you what that sculpture means, using the analytic schema that I just laid out for you, so that you can get a sense of how this symbolic representation works. Now, and this is a strange representation from a Christian perspective because, well, the representation is the Virgin Mary, right? That's the superordinate figure, the female. And inside that is God the Father, and inside that is Christ, all right? Now, the reason it's a strange Christian representation is that it's rare to see Mary represented as a figure that's superordinate to God. And, well, we'll just leave that aside for now. I think part of the reason that that happened for these sculptors, is because they were trying to express the relationship between these three fundamental elements in a way that was slightly different than the canonical Christian representation. But here's how to read it. Well, the outside, that's the unknown. That's the mother of all things. Now, you might say, well, why is the unknown the mother of all things? Well, where does new information come from? New information comes from what you don't know. You already know what you know. Everything new comes from what you don't know. And so, what you don't know is terrifying, certainly, because God only knows what's going to happen when you encounter it. But it's also unbelievably potentially productive. In fact, you might think of it as potential. The unknown is potential itself. And so you need to know how to deal with potential, because potential manifests itself in all sorts of places that you wouldn't necessarily, that technically you wouldn't expect. It's almost by definition. So